Hello and welcome to part 3 of Module 2, which is about 10xing your freelance fees. Today we're going to talk about 3 separate topics. The first one, as you can see, is objection handling, and the next 2 topics are what happens before the sales conversation and what happens after the sales conversation. So up until this point, including objection handling, we've talked about how to conduct the sales conversation. Then we're going to talk about what happens beforehand so you can be best prepared for the conversation, and what happens after so that you know you deliver the right service and you end up getting paid on time and for the full amount that you're owed. But first, let's talk about objection handling. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about with objection handling is the mindset that you need to have. And this is a different mindset from what you've probably been taught if you've learned any sort of sales methods or techniques over the years. Now, most of the time, people tell you sales is a numbers game. And all that matters is you go out and you talk to as many people as possible, or you have as many conversations as possible. And over time, you will sell more people the more conversations you have. In freelancing and when you sell your own service, it's actually exactly the opposite. The reason being, because you are the provider of your service, you simply cannot handle more work than you can do in a month, or that you can do in a quarter, whatever your billing cycle happens to be. So when you sell a client, you're not just selling that client, you're agreeing to a specific amount of work with that client, and that's going to take your time and energy. When you sell multiple clients, you're selling multiple blocks of your time. Even though, as we've talked about before, you're talking about investing in value and you're charging based on value, but the reality is you're going to have to spend a significant amount of time doing these projects, which means if you approach sales as a numbers game, then not only are you devaluing the people that you're talking to in your sales conversations, which will come out in the conversation, but you're also devaluing your time, because you know that instead of getting a better client for a better price, you're trying to close as many people as come into your door, and it's a first come, first serve type situation. Especially if you have leads coming in, which you will learn in this course how to bring leads in consistently. You can afford to take the mindset that you're not trying to close everyone, and instead you're trying to close the right people. Now that shifts the conversation from talking about why they need to hire you into talking about why you should be the person that they work with and why you should work with them in the first place. It completely shifts the power dynamic, and it completely shifts the positioning in your favor so that you can pick the best clients to work with at the highest rates. So let's go into this too. Objections on their own are good. They're not a bad thing. When you get an objection when you're in the marketing process or when you're in the sales process, that is a good sign, because people who are uninterested don't make objections. They simply leave. They simply don't talk about the thing that they want to talk about. Now, once they leave the conversation, you're dealing with people who either buy right away, and those are the action takers that you really want to focus on. And the second type of people are the ones who need their fears assuaged a little bit. So the fears that people have change based on how they were raised and how they've done business up until that point, the words they use, everything like that. But at the end of the day, there's only a few core fears that people tend to have. And those are the fear of loss, the fear of looking stupid, the fear of getting a bad product or something like that, or some previous hurts that they've had with other freelancers. Like, you unfortunately have to deal with the fact that most of your clients have had an unpleasant experience or two with other freelancers. And that puts you at a disadvantage as a freelancer, because you have to not only overcome the objections that they would have working with you, but you would have to overcome the objections they have with working with freelancers in general. The good news is, if they're talking to you, most of the time they're ready for another freelance relationship. They just have to have their questions answered. So with the idea that objections are good, we're going to go over a couple things here that I would consider red flags. Now, this goes back to the mindset thing. If you're not trying to close everyone and you're trying to find the right people, there are certain red flags with clients that you want to be on the lookout for. The first one is that if they show during the sales conversation a what I would call disconcerting lack of clarity on the project, and if they're unwilling to pin down exact deliverables, that is a red flag for you as a freelancer. Typically, those objections come out like, I'm not really sure if we're going to be doing this specifically, or if they say, are you available to work on other things, or are you available to work on some videos, or are you open to doing emails on top of that, or something like that, where they bring up extra work or additional work without ever opening the conversation up to more fees or actually having a plan for that work in the first place. Now, that in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. The bad thing comes in when they're unwilling to pin down the exact deliverables, because you never want to have a sales conversation and agree to a price if you aren't understanding, if you're both not very clear on the exact deliverables. I would say that 95% of the time, a freelancer and a client relationship goes south. The reason for that relationship going south is mismatched expectations on the project. Usually there's miscommunication in there as well, but at the end of the day, it's mismatched expectations on the project. So if you can shore that up before you ever close the deal, then you automatically deal with 95% of your problems. And then you just have to deal with the other 5% of people who tend to be crazy. So that's the first one. It's a red flag if your client shows a disconcerting lack of clarity on the project, and if they're unwilling to pin down the exact deliverables of the project. That's red flag number one. Now, red flag number two is them saying things like their last copywriter didn't work out, quote unquote, or they ask questions or objections like, why should I hire you? Now, the question of why should I hire you should be solved in the conversation prior, in that sales conversation with the authority questions and all that kind of stuff, or even before you get on the phone with your marketing. There should not be a question that comes up at the end of the sales conversation on whether or not they should hire you. Because if they ask that question directly, then they either have a control complex or they have a trust issue. The control complex is them wanting to hold the position of power over you by making you prove yourself to them. And that shifts the power positioning in the conversation, and it shows that they have a power complex. The trust issue is if they've been hurt by freelancers before and they aren't quite sold on hiring another one yet. So they make you justify your existence or justify your work with them. The reason why I call this a red flag is because up until this point, they should have answered that question for themselves already. They should not be on the phone with someone to do the work that you've been talking about if they're not ready to actually hire you about that work. Now, the only exception to this rule tend to be for referrals. If you're getting a direct referral from someone and you're on the first conversation with them, typically that referral only has the testimonial or referral from the person who's referring. And what that leads to is less knowledge about you as a copywriter, which means you may have to answer that question, why should I hire you? In which case, it's a very simple conversation. It's a very simple answer where you talk about your USP as a copywriter, which you will learn in these modules. But it's never a full-on justification. It's simply an answer and a polite answer in that specific situation. Now, the next red flag that I would talk about is someone who says something to the effect of, this is just a small job that might lead to more work. So if you've reached the end of your sales conversation, and this is when the objections start coming up, when you start talking about price or when you start talking about scope, things like that, that's when the objections come to the surface. If they say this is just a small job that might lead to more work, then they're automatically minimizing, and they've proven that they've just wasted your time, essentially, or that they're not wanting to talk about the bigger projects. If they don't bring this up until the very end, it's because they feel that nervousness or they feel those trust issues that are indicative of a person who doesn't like freelancers. Now, the reason I call that a red flag is because if they get to the end of that sales conversation and they're trying to minimize the work involved, then they're not excited about the work. And that means that there is some sort of value disconnect. Either they didn't see the value in the questions that you asked earlier, like we talked about in the beginning of this module, or they are just a type of client that always does this at the end of a negotiation with anyone, where they minimize the value of the person they're talking to in order to get the better deal. Those are not the best kind of clients. And because of the mindset we're having here, where you're trying to close the right people, that is a red flag for you. The next red flag that I'll talk about is the quote unquote, I just need a writer to do this because I don't have time type objections. So that those objections that come up are like, yeah, I just need someone to write this out for me because I would do it normally, but right now I just don't have the time to do it, so I need someone else to do it. Those types of people, those types of clients who hire copywriters are the people who are the micromanagers, the ones who are very, very involved, usually try to rewrite your copy multiple times, but they usually hire a writer not only to get the initial grunt work done, which means it's low value for them, but on top of that, they love to blame the copywriter for the lack of success of the project. Even if they've taken that project on and written it themselves or rewritten things, they will always blame the copywriter for the lack of success of the project, even though they rewrote the stuff. So that's a red flag for you. And if someone says that, especially towards the end of a sales conversation, then I would consider that a huge red flag. So what are some objections that are good? Like, what are the things you want to hear at the end of the sales conversation in terms of objections? Obviously, the best thing that you want to hear is absolutely, let's do this. Where should I send the money? Or what's your wire information? That's the best answer at the end of these conversations. But if someone brings up an objection and they're good objections, they're going to sound something like this. They're either going to ask questions related to price. They're going to be like, I don't know if it sounds like it's going to be quite a lot to work with you. I'm not really sure what kind of stuff we can afford, or I'm not sure if this is going to be within the budget. Now, those types of objections mean that they're automatically thinking about price and that they're thinking about hiring you, and that they've connected the value of the conversation to a higher price. And that means in their head, now they've connected your copy and your work with them to a higher price, and now they just need to justify it in their heads. So in the answer to this objection, the kind of objection that says, I'm not really sure about price or if we're in the right budget, you say, okay, or something to this effect. Again, these aren't specific objection answers because we're trying to go for the right clients and not every client, which means you're tailoring your message to every person that you want to work with. I'm not going to give you a script because scripts are impersonal and they're more about a numbers game. With this type of objection, the price objection, you say something along the lines of, okay, I hear you, absolutely. Like we talked about, the value you could get from this project is X, and you refer back to the conversation that you had earlier and you talk about the value of it. And so you agree that this project would be worth this. And they'd be like, yes, I think we could do that. I think that's a reasonable assumption that we can get that project. And you say, okay, great. And so that's like the initial revenue you could get from this project. And then recurring over time, if you rerun this project or if you run cold traffic to it, then we thought you could get around Y, right? And Y would be the higher amount that you talked about. And they say, yeah, that's about right. And so then you just kind of lead them into understanding the benefit of the copy and make them agree with you along the way. And you say, okay, so what do you think it would cost if you did this yourself and you didn't get those results? Or if you paid someone else a lower amount of money and they either hurt your business or didn't get those results? They'd be like, well, we'd pay them the money and then the copy wouldn't convert as well. And so we'd be losing the difference. And you'd be like, yeah. And if they don't make that connection themselves, you can say that. Well, you'd be like, okay, you pay a lower price copywriter, or you don't pay a copywriter at all and you write it yourself and it converts at this amount. So essentially, choosing to do it yourself has cost you about, whatever amount of money, about $45,000, $100,000, $500,000, whatever it happens to be. So the cost of doing it yourself or hiring a less experienced copywriter or a less good copywriter, if you don't want to say the word experienced, then that would be the cost. So is that a cost that you're comfortable with? And they would say, no, of course not. And then you'd say, okay, well, my prices are not low, but they are reasonable and they are competitive. So let's talk about the project specifically, exactly what you want, and then we can go from there to make sure that this is within your budget. And you say, okay. And you lead them into the conversation around the specifics. And if you're selling a particular project, like a package, like we talk about in some of these modules, then that package price is set in stone. And you would just increase the price of that package every single time you have a new client because you're showing the value of that package through your previous clients. A couple other objections are the time objections. So we just talked about price objection. Another objection is time objections, where they aren't in the right mindset to go right now, or maybe they're talking about a project in the future, or they're just trying to like stall for time, where the client says, okay, yeah, this sounds really, really good. The biggest thing is that, we're looking at a project in December. So I don't know if it's the right time right now to bring you on. And, I think maybe if we reach back out in December or, maybe in November, then we could get started on this and that would be a better time. You say, okay, no, I hear you. December's a little ways off, but I have a quick question. Have you nailed down your marketing strategy yet for this? And they'd say, not really. We don't have any specifics laid out yet. You're like, okay, that's fine. If you don't have the marketing strategy done yet, and you're not really sure on how best to promote this, then one of the things I do is actually help people construct those things so that my copy works best. And when I write the copy, I really like to know that the funnel itself and the marketing strategy is strong behind it, so that I'm not just writing something that's not going to get seen, or an email that's not going to get clicked, or something like that. So I really like to be involved in the strategy portion. And if you haven't started that yet, then you're only 3 months out, or you're only 4 months out, or 6 months out, and you really need to start thinking about these things early. I mean, wouldn't you agree that you would want to have that strategy laid down before you start thinking about hiring people to do the specific pieces? And they're like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. You're like, okay, well, that's one of the services I offer as a copywriter, and I come in and I would love to help you with that. And usually my clients love that part because it's one less thing that they have on their plate. And so you start adding the value of your strategy sessions and your consulting knowledge. You can not only increase the price of your ticket, but you can also structure the conversation into the things that you're either most comfortable writing about or that you are most eager to write about. That way, the time objection becomes more of a partnership question where you're discussing the details of their marketing with them so they can grow their business, rather than just a transactional thing where you're writing the copy for something. Now, in one of the next modules that you'll go through, it will show you exactly how to position yourself if you're going to be a copywriter versus a consultant versus a strategist, something like that. But this kind of objection, the time objection, especially if there's no specific dates involved, as in they say, I'm not sure if we're ready to move forward with this right now. Those types of objections are usually stalling objections because they're uncomfortable with making a purchase right then and there. Now, because you're going for quality and not for everyone, I personally believe you should not force the conversation, or you should not force the sale on that call. However, one thing you can do with a time objection is let them know about the cost to waiting. And the cost to waiting is basically like, okay, yeah, if you're not ready to move forward yet, then I can totally understand that, or you need some time to work on the strategy. But like we just talked about, this promotion is most likely going to get you X, or has the potential to get you this or this amount of money. And so, for every week you wait, or for every month you wait, you're essentially losing out on a portion of that revenue. And so, I know it sounds a little ominous, but when you think about not implementing this quicker, then pretty much every week you're wasting X amount of money, or you're spending X amount of money without making anything back. And they're like, you know what, that makes perfect sense. Maybe we should work on this soon. But if the client is really adamant and says, we're not ready to move forward just yet, and we will contact you again, and you say, okay, great, I appreciate that. This is a great call. I look forward to working with you. I'll follow up again in blank number of days or weeks. So then you set a specific time to follow up, And then you just continue following up if that's a client that you want to work with. I'm not someone who's going to chase them down and force them to pay because, like I said, it's all about getting the right people into your practice and not everyone into your practice, because anyone can sell lower dollar copy and just mill that stuff out and just churn it out, have it be okay, mediocre, whatever. If you're working with good clients and you want the best results possible, you treat them like this. You treat them respectfully, professionally, and you simply allow them to see some of the things that they're doing and the value that they're leaving on the table, and then you let it lie. That's what it is. So the two objections I really love are the price objection and the time objection, because that means they're thinking about hiring you, but there's a specific thing holding them back, and you can always talk about what those things are. So that's why I say objections are good. So the next thing I want to talk about is the strategy of preeminence. I did not invent this. This is actually the intellectual property of a man called Jay Abraham. Jay Abraham is known as one of the greatest marketing consultants who's ever lived. He's created easily over $10 billion worth of wealth for his clients. Extremely smart, savvy marketing mind. Very well respected. Now, Jay's entire business model is built around this strategy of preeminence. Now, the strategy of preeminence, boiled down to its core parts, is simply caring about your clients' results as much or more than they do, and deciding to be the preeminent expert in your industry or in your niche. Now, when you flesh that out a little bit, then you start to realize that if you care about your clients' results more than they care about their own, that means that it is irresponsible of you to not let them hire you. And the way that pans out is a person will come to you for your copywriting services. Your copywriting services are almost guaranteed to make them more money than they pay you, which means that it is a service to their business to pay you money to work on their copy. And that's not just a mentality that you need to have, which it is a mentality you need to have, but it's also a verifiable fact. If you do the homework and if you do the right stuff as a copywriter, it is very difficult to fail completely as a copywriter. And if you do fail completely, it's probably because you were shooting for the moon and whatever you tried did not work, and your business owner knows that, your client knows that. But here's the thing. As a copywriter, because you are a value-added resource, you are not a value subtractor, you are not a cost, you are not an expense, you're a value-added resource, then to let them walk away without paying you money is essentially like them walking away from a dinner with you, but they left $1,000 on the dinner table, or they left $10,000 on the dinner table. That's not your money. They didn't give it to you. They just left it there. It's their money. And your job, obviously, as a good person, would be to stand up and yell at them and say, hey, you left your money on the table, you know? And if they insist on leaving their money on the table, then, okay, that's on them. That's what they do. But you must do everything in your power if you are going to subscribe to the idea of being the preeminent expert to get them to hire you so that you can make them money. When I deal with my clients, I am extremely confident in my ability to grow their business because what I know as a copywriter is incredibly valuable for them. And my writing as a copywriter is incredibly valuable for their business. And I know that, and I can prove that to myself through experience, but I knew that before I even had the experience because I was sold on copywriting. And my mentors sold me on copywriting and how powerful it was. So with that mentality, you have to approach every client conversation that you want to have as a client with the mentality of, if this person walks away without paying me, they are leaving money on the table and they are doing their business a disservice. They're doing their customers a disservice. They're doing their potential customers a disservice because they haven't hired me to sell more of their product. Now, that means a couple things. It means you have to be confident in your own abilities, and you have to be confident in your client's ability to deliver on what they say they're going to deliver. If those two things mesh, the strategy of preeminence kicks off, and you do everything in your power to get them to hire you. That is the mentality that I want you to have as a copywriter when you're 10xing your fees, because at that point, especially if you're picking the right clients, then it doesn't really matter how much they pay you. because you could get paid $10,000, $100,000 plus royalties, which is what Jay Abraham charged, by the way, the guy who invented this. $100,000 plus royalties is far, far less than the amount of value he added to his clients. And the same goes for you. The amount of value you can add to your clients is exponentially more than the amount that you're going to charge. So that's the strategy of preeminence. So let's dive into what happens before the call, before you hop on the phone with this client. Now, there's a couple things that you want to focus on before you hop on a call with a client, assuming that you have some time to prepare. Either they've scheduled a call with you later, or you have some time to research before the call. Whatever happens, I'm assuming that this isn't off the cuff, or this isn't a conversation at a networking event or something like that. This is when you have time to prepare. So the first thing you want to do is detective work. And actually, detective work I can show you right here on the internet. So let's go ahead and dive in to the internet and do a little bit of detective work on a client. So let's say I'm approached by Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is obviously one of the most well-known personal development coaches, high-performance coaches on the planet. And so there isn't a lot of detective work on who he is because he's extremely well-known. Now, what I want to find out is, who are his people? What is he offering? Who are the businesses that he's associated with? Like, what is this RMT Center? Is that a thing? Is Tony connected with it? What are we promoting here? Are we promoting one of Tony's books? If so, who are his partners in that book? Or what does he want to talk to me about specifically? Now, when we're doing detective work here, we're looking at the size of his social media audience. So let's go onto Facebook and find out how many people Tony Robbins has following him. Yeah, I'm sure it's in the millions, but we're going to figure it out right here live. All right, so Tony Robbins has 2.5 million people following him. He probably has more than 1 million people on his email list, right? And now that's the kind of intel we're looking at. How many social media followers does he have? How many Twitter followers does he have? How many Facebook followers? How many YouTube subscribers? How many email people on his email list do you think he has? What are some of the products that he offers? What are some of the partners he works with? What are his most successful books versus his not successful books? Some of these things. Learn about the person that you're going to talk to. If it's not Tony Robbins and he doesn't have, 23 million results on Google, then you can always find them on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube or whatever they happen to be, because if they're coming to you and they're a business owner with enough money to invest, then your job is to dig, and your job is to figure out who they are and what they need help with to the best of your ability. That detective work is going to serve you later, because when you show up at the conversation, you know a lot about them, you know what their numbers are, you know what they're trying to promote, you know who their partners are, and you can start talking about what they do. So if Tony approached me to help him with this business, rmtcenter.com, then I'm going to look at this and I'm going to go, okay, he has a minute and 39 second video up front here where he's talking face to camera about what this is. Free life coaching, #1 strategy for creating personal change in others. Click here. What happens when I click through this funnel? This funnel shows up and sends me to an application. Oh, it doesn't. Maybe the link is broken. What's going on here? Okay, it's not. It's an opt-in pop-up. When I opt in here, what happens next on that page? What do I get to see? Are the videos there? Who's talking about this type of stuff? That's the type of intel that you want on these clients, because when you show up and you say, yeah, I saw that you had a video on your RMT thing, how's that converting? Have you ever tried a webinar? Have you tried a video series? Have you tried a non-opt-in video series because you're selling a high-ticket product here? Like, what are you doing? That detective work and that type of knowledge of your prospect before you ever hop on the phone with them is going to speak volumes about your ability to perform as a professional for that person. Now, that's the detective work, and I can go super deep into that, but it's very specific to each client that you get. If you get a client who's a relative nobody, you can still dig into what they have, their website, their social media, what they post, everything like that, because everybody at this point, especially if they're a serious person in business, has left somewhat of a trail. And when you dig into that trail and figure out what they're doing, then you know enough about them to start the conversation. And that is a huge boon to you as a copywriter, because that shows you can do your research before they ever even show up with a call. And you can afford to do that if you're looking for a client that you want to work with, versus you couldn't do this for 100 people. You could only do this for a couple people because those are the ones you really want to work with. And that's what I would focus on here. So that's the detective work. You want to do that at the start. So before the call, once you figure out who you're talking to, do the detective work. The next thing you want to do is branding and authority. So before the call happens, the person is going to figure out who you are and why they want to talk with you somehow. Now, there's a module later on in this training that shows you specifically how I would recommend you do this, but you have to understand from a positioning standpoint how you come across as a copywriter, how you come across as a professional. Because when someone schedules a call with you or decides to talk with you in the first place, they're going to look you up, they're going to look at your social media, they're going to speak to their friends about you, especially if they're in business circles. So you have to understand where you are in your prospect's eyes, and you have to have a really good idea of what that is. So again, we'll hop out of here real quick. The best thing I can say for this is get to know who you are when someone Googles you. Now, I'm lucky in that my last name is relatively easy to go for. Like, they can see me on Google+, they can see me on LinkedIn. They see that I'm part of Built in Colorado with that the startup founders and all that kind of stuff. So this is something that you can control, especially if you have a name that is easier to SEO. Like if your name is John Smith, I'm sorry, this is going to be very difficult for you. Just rely on your social media profiles because that's how they're going to reach out to you. But if you can control this, start here. If you can't control that, start at the points where they're going to search for you, like on Facebook or on YouTube or on Twitter, and then go from there. Now, understanding how you come across is also all about looking at your social media profiles and your internet footprint, whatever it happens to be, and trying to put yourself in your prospect's shoes and going, how is that going to reflect on me as a person? How is that going to reflect on their position, or the positioning that I have for them? If the first picture they see when they click on your social media is you doing a beer bong when you were in college, it's not going to lead to a lot of certainty in your ability. Regardless of how good of a writer you are, that first impression is going to matter. So before the call, you have to make sure that your branding and authority is on point, at least to the extent that you can control it, and it is leading you towards the actual type of person you want to be perceived as. Now, I'm not telling you to be inauthentic, but I am telling you that first impressions matter, and if the first impression of you is wrong, then you're going to be fighting an uphill battle during that call. You may even have the call canceled on you. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the waitlist. So the waitlist is a concept that my mentor Ryan Levesque talked about in one of his private masterminds on how to properly position yourself as a copywriter or as a service provider in general to give yourself that power positioning or that in-demand type feel. Now, I have two beliefs on the waitlist. The first belief is that if you have the time and you have the confidence to set up a waitlist in the very, very beginning, then it will help your positioning tremendously when people actually do join the waitlist and then reach out to work with you. So with that being said, the waitlist is also a huge barrier because the vast majority of people who are looking for help, especially as a copywriter or for copywriting services, they're asking in order to get something done quickly. Nobody really pre-plans having a copywriting project. unless you are looking for a celebrity writer for your new product launch and you're trying to reach out to them, and you reach out early because you know they're in demand, it requires a certain amount of positioning and finesse to have a wait list that is extremely effective. By having a wait list when you're a relative nobody or nobody knows your name, then they might think that you have a higher positioning, but they also aren't likely to join your wait list in the first place. They're just going to go with another provider who's more available and more open to having the conversation. This is why I don't have a wait list yet. This is why I don't have a list that people join to become a client of mine and then wait on me hand and foot until I can work with them. Typically, they reach out to me directly and I say, okay, yes, this is when I have room, or this is the next booking I can put you in. And if that's too far out for them, then they either deal with it or they drop it. So the waitlist is one of those love and hate relationships. If you can handle it, if you have the time and the confidence and you're willing to put the effort into branding and authority, then I would say start with a waitlist so you get that extra positioning boost. If you don't have the luxury of time, or if you don't quite have the confidence yet to put yourself in that position, I would recommend not having a wait list, because that is going to allow you to have more conversations with more clients and then build your positioning and build your branding and authority so that eventually you can have a wait list, and it's a legitimate wait list. It's not just a made up thing. All right, let's talk about after the call. So before the call, you've got your branding and positioning, and you've got your detective work done, and you've got potentially the wait list or not. And during the call is what this entire module up until this point was all about. So let's talk about after the call and what happens once you've hung up the phone. So once you've hung up the phone, there's a couple things you can do. If you're talking with a copywriting client and you've hung up the phone about the specifics of that project, then the last thing you say before you hang up is, okay, I'm gonna go to my office, I'm gonna drop a proposal that shows you exactly what we'll be working on, and I will go ahead and I will throw in the budget for this project. So you don't really discuss price on the call, because you're out for that. If they demand to know what the price is, then you say, look, I can't give you a good idea on price until I've taken a step back, looked at everything that we're going to do on this project, and gotten it in order so I know exactly what we're going to be looking on. I can't give you a price because that would be irresponsible of me on this call. Now, I will get you a proposal within the next 24 hours, and that will have the price on it, and we can look at that and agree to that if the project suits you. Or we can look at that and agree to that with confidence. So once you've gotten off the call, then you start writing the proposal. And the proposal is your first sales letter. It's the first thing that your client is going to see. It's going to review everything you talked about on the call. It's very rapidly given to them, like within 24 hours or so. And the price is the price. Now, a client can either say, no, that's too high, or no, I don't want to pay that. They can say, yes, let's do it, or they'll negotiate with you. Those are the three options: no, yes, or negotiate. So if they say no, say, okay, that's great. All you have to be is confident in your price. If you're not confident in your price and they say no, you're going to come back and say, okay, well, I can do it for this. That immediately punches you in the throat, because you've now just shown them that you're willing to back down on price and that you were trying to overcharge them in the first place. So never, ever back down on price. And if there is a no to that proposal, then you truly want the business, then you can look at the proposal, you can look at what they're saying, and you can say, okay, I understand you think that's too high. We can take off this, we can take off this, we can take off this and this. And you start marking things off on the proposal and saying, for your price point or for what you want to do, we can do these things. Now that forces them on the defensive and makes them choose whether or not they want the full package at the full price or the limited package at the limited price. And that's on them. That's not on you. Never straight up back down from your price once you've given it. So that's my first piece of advice. If the answer is yes, awesome. Don't debate it. Don't, say, oh yeah, that's great. We'll talk about it a little bit more. No, just go straight with that and say, okay, awesome. You can pay by wire, you can pay by check, or you can pay by card through my processing company. Which would you prefer? Or you can pay by wire or by PayPal. Those are the only two I accept. Or I only accept checks. I know Gary Benchevanga only accepted checks for his products or his work. So once you get that figured out, then I would highly recommend getting a PayPal account if you don't already have a PayPal account. I would highly recommend wire transfers. For the most part, wire transfers are extremely seamless, and they're much harder for your clients to claw back into legally if something happens. So, and trust me, as a freelancer, you're going to see some crazy stuff. So that take what I say seriously here. You can also create a payment processor either by going to get a merchant account or by finding one of those smaller processors or one of the more aggregated processors like Stripe is another one. I know PayPal also does credit card processing if you want them to. You can set anything up like that if you want to take credit cards or something like that, or going with PayPal in general, just straight PayPal to PayPal. It's up to you. However you get paid is largely up to you. Just don't be afraid to get paid in multiple ways, because some clients like PayPal the most, some clients like wire transfers, some clients like checks. I've received payments through any of those things. Just don't make getting paid a burden to them, because you don't want that extra hang up. Now, if you send a proposal and you don't get a no, a yes, or a negotiate, and they don't respond, your job is to follow up. And that follow-up should only last for a certain amount of time, because if they get the proposal and they disappear for a while, they're a bad client and you don't want them. And that's a great thing for you, because now you don't have to waste your time on them. So what happens with a follow-up? If you send the proposal within 24 hours of hanging up your phone call and they do not respond in that same 24 hours, send a reminder 24 hours after you sent the proposal. So write the proposal, send it within 24 hours of your call, and then if they don't respond, send another email reminder with a very simple, hey, just wanted to make sure you got this type message 24 hours after you initially sent the proposal. Then, if they don't respond to your 24-hour one, wait 72 hours after that. And then if they don't respond to your 72-hour follow-up with them in a week or so, and then let them drop, because they're not someone you want to work with. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes people travel. Sometimes someone's out of the office, whatever. But I've found that a week and a half is pretty much the only time frame that someone is going to follow up with you, if they're going to follow up with you at all, or if they're going to want something. Now, if they come back a month later and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I fell off the map, let's do this, give them exactly one chance. And if they ever look like they're going to flake out on you again, leave, because I guarantee you're not getting the second payment if you work with them. And I've had that happen to me multiple times. So proposals, send a proposal within 24 hours with the specific price, and never back down. If you want to, take off specific things of the proposal actively and show them, okay, this is what you can get for your budget. Getting paid, don't make it a barrier. Just choose whatever you have to choose. Get it set up. There are free videos, very fast videos on YouTube or anywhere on the web getting set up with any payment processor. However, I would not let it be an obstacle to you. So if getting a merchant account scares you, or applying for one scares you, or it's going to take too long, I don't have a merchant account. I have Stripe and I have PayPal, and I have my banks. So don't let it be a burden. Next, follow up. 24 hours after your initial proposal, 72 hours after your initial follow-up, and then 1 week after the 72 hours, and then let it drop. And then if they come back to you after that, give them one chance, and then drop them if they look like they're going to flake again. So that is Module 2, how to 10x your fees as a freelancer. So if you have questions, bring them to the Q&A call or ask them in the Facebook group. I appreciate your time and attention for this. But the main thing that I want you to get out of this entire module is that your ability to 10x your freelance fees is primarily in your mindset and the conversation that you have with your clients around value. And it's not about time. It's not about specific things that you're offering. It's about your clients and the value that you bring to them with your services. Thank you and have a great day.